locked inside the ice at the top of the world, and at the bottom of it, there's a scar from a single day that no history book recorded. Around the year 1258, the sky over the whole planet began to dim. Harvest failed on the other side of the world. Thousands of people starved in cities that had never heard of the thing that killed them. It was the largest volcanic eruption in thousands of years, bigger than any you've ever heard of. And for almost 7.5 centuries, no one on Earth knew which volcano had done it. The story doesn't begin with fire. It begins with ice. Every year, snow falls on Greenland and Antarctica and never melts, pressing down layer by layer into ice that's like a diary of the planet's air, going back thousands of years. When a giant volcano erupts, it fires sulfur high into the sky, and that sulfur eventually rains down and gets frozen into the ice as a spike of acid you can measure. When scientists drilled these cores, they found something that stopped them cold. Around 1258, in the ice at both poles, sat one of the largest sulfur spikes in the entire record, roughly twice the size of the famous Tambora eruption. Something colossal had happened, but the ice couldn't tell them where. To see what that spike did to people, you have to go to Europe to the year 1258. English monks, who wrote down the weather like clockwork, recorded a year that made no sense. The summer was cold and drowned in rain. Crops rotted in the fields. Frost came when it shouldn't. Then came the famine. A chronicler named Matthew Paris described the poor dying in the streets faster than they could be buried. And centuries later, beneath modern London, archaeologists dug up something that matched his words exactly. Mass graves, thousands of bodies, stacked in careful rows, dated to right around this catastrophe. Nobody at the time connected any of it to a mountain none of them would ever see on the far side of the planet. For decades, that missing volcano was one of the great mysteries of Earth science. The ice proved beyond doubt that a monster had erupted, one of the biggest in the last 10,000 years. But a volcano that huge should have left an obvious crater, an obvious story, an obvious name. This one had left nothing anyone could find. Scientists went hunting. They suspected a volcano in Mexico, then one in Ecuador, then others scattered around the world. And one by one, the suspects didn't fit. The eruption was too big, its fingerprint too strange. Somewhere out, there was a volcano that had shaken the whole planet, and then somehow vanished from human memory. The first real clue wasn't in a rock. It was in a book, an old manuscript from Indonesia, written on strips of dried palm leaf in an ancient language. Tucked inside was the memory of a catastrophe, a mountain called Somalas that had erupted so violently it collapsed, burying a kingdom and its capital city, a place called Pamitan, in ash. The people of the island had remembered it for centuries in writing, even as the rest of the world forgot. When researchers put that account next to the timing in the ice, the pieces started to lock together. The lost volcano might not be lost at all. It might have a name and an address on the island of Lombok. In 2013, a team of scientists led by the geographer Frank Levine went to Lombok to test the idea. And what they found on the ground matched the ice perfectly. Blanketing the island were thick deposits of ash and pumice, meters deep in places, laid down in a single, enormous event. When they analyzed the chemistry of that ash and compared it to the tiny glass shards trapped in the polar ice, they matched the same volcano, the same fingerprint on opposite ends of the planet. Radiocarbon dating placed it in the middle of the 13th century. After more than 750 years, the culprit finally had a name, Somalas, a peak that had once towered over Lombok as part of the Mount Rinjani volcanic complex. So how big was it really? On the scale volcanologists use to measure eruptions, Somalas rates a 7, a category so violent that only a handful of eruptions in all of recorded history reach it. It blasted something like 40 cubic kilometers of rock into the air. The column of ash and gas punched through the sky and climbed more than 40 kilometers up into the stratosphere, well above where jets fly today. When a mountain finally emptied itself, its own summit collapsed inward, leaving a caldera around 6 kilometers wide, the giant crater you can still stand on the rim of today, now cradling a brilliant blue lake. To put it plainly, this single eruption was larger than Tambora, larger than Krakatoa, the biggest the human record has ever captured. Try to picture the day it happened on Lombok. Superheated avalanches of ash and gas, called pyroclastic flows, would have roared down the mountain faster than a car, incinerating everything in their path. Ash fell so thickly it buried the landscape, collapsing roofs and smothering fields for hundreds of kilometers around. The kingdom's capital, Pamitan, and everyone in it simply disappeared beneath it, an entire city erased in an afternoon. To this day, archaeologists believe Pamitan is still down there, an Indonesian Pompeii, sealed under the ash, waiting to be found. The people who survived remembered it as the day their world ended, and they were the ones who wrote it down. But Somalas didn't just destroy an island. It reached out and touched the entire planet. All that sulfur, floating high in the stratosphere, spread into a thin veil that wrapped around the globe and reflected sunlight back into space. The world cooled. Summers turned cold and strange, thousands of kilometers from the volcano. Some scientists think this eruption helped tip the climate toward the coldest centuries of the last 1,000 years, a long chill, sometimes called the Little Ice Age. From Japan to England, people recorded failed crops, brutal winters, and dying livestock, never knowing that the cause was a single mountain in the Indian Ocean that most of them had never heard of. One eruption, one day, a shadow cast over the whole world. Here's the part that should give you pause. Somalas isn't a relic. Inside that 6-kilometer caldera, a new volcano has been quietly rebuilding. Its name is Burjari, a cone rising out of the crater lake, and it is very much alive, erupting again and again in recent decades, throwing up ash clouds big enough to ground flights across the region. Mount Rinjani, the complex it belongs to, remains one of the most active volcanoes in Indonesia, a country that sits on more active volcanoes than anywhere else on Earth. The mountain that darkened the medieval sky didn't die in 1257. It's still here, still building, still capable, a reminder that the planet has done this before, and it will do it again. The largest eruption in 7,000 years didn't leave behind a legend, or a famous name, or a date every schoolchild learns. It left a spike in the ice, a few lines on a palm leaf, and a beautiful blue lake sitting in the wound it tore open. For 7.5 centuries, its story was scattered across the world in pieces, frozen at the poles, buried under London, folded into an old book on an Indonesian island, waiting for someone to put them together. And that's the strange, humbling truth of it. The single most powerful thing to happen in the age of human history was something we very nearly forgot entirely. So the next time you look up at a quiet mountain, remember what the ice remembers. There's more waiting for you right now, so stick around and keep wondering.